Mic check 1 2 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and some of you know that one of my favorite consoles or one of my favorite handhelds is the Game Boy Advance. I actually really like a lot of the games that came out for the Game Boy Advance because it's essentially a Super Nintendo in your pocket. You figure the original Game Boy was like Nintendo in your pocket, and the Game Boy Advance was the Super Nintendo. So there were actually like a lot of ports that were sent from the Game Boy Advance, or sent from the Super Nintendo to the Game Boy Advance that play very much like their counterparts on the Super Nintendo. A couple quick shoutouts would be a game like Phalanx. This was a space shooter that was on the Super Nintendo. They made a Game Boy Advance version, which is very, very good. You also have R-Type 3, which got a port to the Game Boy Advance. This game plays very much like its Super Nintendo counterpart, so a very good game as well. And then you also have the Contra Advance, the Alien Wars. So this is pretty much Contra Alien Wars, the one that you saw on the Super Nintendo, but they just brought it to the Game Boy Advance. So we saw some really cool games get sent over to the Game Boy Advance during its lifespan. But then we've also seen some games that were originally on the Game Boy Advance get moved on over to the Switch. And I feel like there are at least 6 more games that I could think of that I would like to see moved on over to the Switch before the end of the original Switch life cycle. So I kind of want to showcase those 5 games, and then you guys can let me know what you think down in the comments, or let me know if there are any other Game Boy Advance games that you would like to see moved on over to the Switch. So the first game that I'm going to go ahead and share, this is a game that I played back when I was in undergrad, and that is Shaman King for the Game Boy Advance. So Shaman King is actually a very cool, like, side-scrolling hack and slash, like RPG game. This is kind of a bit of a clone of actually the Castlevania games in a way. The only difference is that when you get like your different spirit moves and things like that, he can do a lot of different abilities. He calls out like these different avatars that unleash different attacks, and I think this is a very cool take on the game. It was produced by Konami, so that probably explains a lot of the likeness that you see between this game and the Castlevania games. But I think Shaman King in its own right is a very fun game that I think everyone should try, and the music in this game is very good soundtrack. And then speaking of Shaman King, then you have Shaman King 2, Master of Spirits. So this is it just takes everything that I liked about the original Shaman King and takes it up a notch. Really cool level designs, very nice sprite work, very good animations. I think this is one that you will like, again, if you are a fan of the Castlevania games. And I would like to see both of these games brought to the Switch in some way. I think that they could do a very cool like Shaman King dual pack where maybe they have both of these games on one cart or one game card. Definitely something that I would be interested in seeing. Would like to see Nintendo do that. All right, the next game that I want to see moved on over to the Switch is Astro Boy. Now, Astro Boy Omega Factor is definitely a unique take on Astro Boy. This one plays as a bit more of like a side-scrolling kind of beat-em-up slash like shooter. It has like shooter elements to it as well. There are levels where you're flying through the sky, just utilizing Astro Boy's powers. Or I think they had that on the PSP version. There is a PSP version of this game as well. And for some reason, like the PSP and the I believe the PlayStation versions of this game don't get as much love as the Game Boy Advance version, but this is probably the superior way to play this game, and I would love to see, if not a port of this game to the Switch, I'd like to see some type of remake of Astro Boy. I think this makes for a great port, especially considering some of the games we've seen sent on over to the Switch. The next one that for sure deserves an entry on the Switch is Gunstar Heroes. Now, I don't think we've seen a console-based Gunstar game since the original Gunstar Heroes on the Sega Genesis. They went ahead and made this Game Boy Advance version, but I think we're long overdue for another entry into the Gunstar Heroes franchise. So this is one that I would like to see ported over to the Switch, perhaps with a new entry into the series or into the franchise. If you're a fan of run and gun shooters, you will love Gunstar Heroes. Just considering the different weapons that you get in this game, the level design, the music, just the different attacks that you have. It's just a ton of fun, bullets flying all over the screen. I think if you're a run and gun shooter, you will be a fan of Gunstar Superheroes. Would love to see something like this on the Switch. Then the next one we have is Metroid Fusion. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. I think if they were to do some type of port of Metroid Fusion to the Nintendo Switch, I would like to see some type of Metroid compilation disc or Metroid compilation cartridge where it has like Metroid, the original Metroid, or maybe all the Metroid handhelds, right? So Metroid 2, Return of Samus, Metroid Zero Mission, Metroid Fusion. I think maybe if you had like a game that had all three of those games on one cart, I think that would be really cool to see. I doubt Nintendo does something like that with the Metroid series, but I mean, this is one of the better side-scrolling Metroid games that came out for the Game Boy Advance, and this is definitely one that I think would do well in the modern era of gaming, especially if it got some type of Switch port. All right, the last one that I would highly, highly recommend Nintendo look into this is Dragon Ball Adventure. So, a huge fan of this game. I've beaten this game multiple times. This is essentially a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. This game is really cool because you can do ground combos, you can do air combos, you can shoot energy projections, right, via the Kamehameha. You're able to actually like charge up your Kamehameha and do like longer energy blasts that take like multiple hits. The cool thing about this is that once you get to the boss battles are fought in like this Street Fighter style format where, you know, you each get an energy bar and you're pretty much battling it out to the end. It does follow the original Dragon Ball Z storyline, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've beaten this game, but this is an amazing side-scrolling beat 'em up. And if they did do some type of, you know, Dragon Ball compilation cart, I think they could do something like this along with like the Revenge of Piccolo and any one of those other like adventure style Dragon Ball Z games that wasn't specifically dedicated to the fighting aspect of Dragon Ball Z. I think something like this being ported to the Switch would do very well. There are a lot of people who probably would like to play this game but never got the chance to, just because this is one of the more expensive Game Boy Advance games. But to be quite honest with you, it's well worth it. If you like fighting games, if you like beat 'em ups, I highly recommend you check this game out. And this is one that I think would do well on the Nintendo Switch. And that does it for my list. Dragon Ball Adventure, Metroid Fusion, Gunstar Superheroes, the Shaman King games for sure, and Astro Boy. I think these games definitely warrant a spot somewhere in the Switch library, just considering some of the other games that we've seen ported over. And I think it would give this generation an opportunity to play some really amazing games. You guys let me know what you think about this. What games would you like to see? What Game Boy Advance games would you like to see moved on over to the Switch? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.